Hello and welcome to my video on tanks that I think should be in Blitz, my personal opinion. Now, a little informative thing here. As I was writing this video, I changed the layout on how the tanks are going to be portrayed to make it much more shorter and condensed after the first one. So, with that said, on to the first tank.
Now, first tank on our list is the Brazilian CCL X1 Pioneiro. Now the Pioneiro is a complete upgrade of the World War II M3 Stuart light tank. So basically this vehicle would be identical to the Stuart in the armor, maneuverability, and speed aspect. Now the difference between the Pioneiro and the original M3 is, instead of a 37mm cannon, the Pioneiro has a low pressure 90mm cannon with a whole brand new turret with 25mm of turret armor all around, except for the mantlet, which is 52mm. Now, in-game, I see the Pioneiro sitting at tier 6, and its main selling point would be its 90mm gun, which would be similar into playstyle and aspect to the German M41's 90mm. Now, the Pioneiro would have 3 shell types: armor piercing, heat, and hesh. Now, let's talk about the penetration of each shell. The standard AP shell would have 145 degrees of penetration, with the heat shell having 180 degrees of penetration. And now, to the really good and fun part about this tank, its hesh shell, which will have 80 degrees of penetration. Now, with the penetration out of the way, let's get into the average damage of each shell. Now, the standard AP shell would have an average damage of 220, with the heat shell having an average of 185. But the hesh shell would have an average damage of 290. So the tank is not lacking by any means in the firepower department. But now let's talk to the reload, shell velocity, aim time, and dispersion. Let's first talk about the aim time. The aim time on this vehicle, I put it at 2.20 seconds for base aim time. But of course you can reduce that with provisions and such, but I couldn't figure out how low you could get it. But we're just gonna go with 2.20 seconds for right now. Now the shell velocity. The shell velocity for AP is 800 meters per second. Then the heat shell velocity is actually 865 meters per second. Now, the hesh shell's velocity is the slowest out of all three, at 700 meters per second. Also, let me tell you what the dispersion is. The dispersion at 100 meters is 0.353. Now, reload time. The base reload time is 6.97 seconds, but can be reduced to 6.36 seconds. Okay, now onto the turret traverse and gun elevation. Turret traverse speed would be 49.42 degrees per second, and gun elevation elevated would be 15 degrees, and depression would be at 10 degrees. So you'd be able to work hills and such in this tank, and be able to do some spotting, and maybe get some shots in and back off. Now, last but not least, is the view range of the vehicle would be 295.5 meters. So, slightly better than the Chaffee's view range. Oh, and I also almost forgot, the Pioneiro could only carry 28 rounds max in real life, so that's the amount of rounds you carry with this vehicle in the game. Now, if that is everything, let's move on to the next tank.
Alright, next tank on our list is the X1A2, another Brazilian light tank. Now the X1A2 is almost identical to the X1 in the stats department, but in the looks department they're similar because the X1 and X1A2 have the same turret, but the X1A2 has a completely new design for the hull. Fun fact, the X1A2 is the first and so far only serially produced tank which was fully designed in Brazil and used in active service, but shares some components with the Stuart and Sherman. Now the stats for the tank should have appeared on screen, and with the tier of the vehicle, I feel like it should be in tier 7, just above the X1 A1 Monero. Okay, now for our third tank on the list. That vehicle is Oddball's M4 Sherman. Now for some context, this tank comes from the 1970s movie Kelly's Heroes, which is one of my personal favorite war movies, but let's talk about how the vehicle would be in game. Now most of the stats should be appearing on screen. Now Oddball's Sherman would be placed at tier 6 and have a stock Sherman hollow turret, but you're packing a 76mm main gun, but fitted with a modified diesel engine in the vehicle, making it the fastest Sherman in game in both forward and reverse. Now, there's a feature that this tank will have that no other vehicle will have in game. Seeing that Wargaming is adding different features into the game like dynamic armor, I thought this feature Oddball Sherman will fit right into the game, and that feature is paint shells. Now you might be asking, how are we going to use paint shells in game? It would be OP. Yes, this is true, but I think I figured a way out to make it balance. The first thing is the shell blinds the target when shot between like 3 and 1 second, and I feel that's reasonably balanced. Now, I had an idea of how Wargaming could release this vehicle, like in an event or something, but a lot of people have said that Wargaming won't make this vehicle due to copyright. But literally, Warlord Games made a model of Oddball Sherman for a tabletop game, so if they did it, I'm sure Wargaming could certainly do it. Now, on to the next vehicle, a co-star with Oddball Sherman in the 1970s movies, Kelly's Heroes. The T-34 Tiger. A cursed tank, but a movie star nonetheless. Now, I'm sure most people watching this video have heard of or seen the T-34 Tigers in media, like Band of Brothers, Saving Private Ryan, and Kelly's Heroes. The T-34 Tiger is probably one of the most famous cursed tanks, and it's kind of weird that no T-34 Tigers is featured in video games, but I could be wrong. But I've never seen no T-34 Tigers in video games. But I'm getting off topic. How would I see the T-34 Tiger in World of Tanks Blitz? Well, I can see 3 ways Wargaming could make the T-34 Tiger in game. 1, it being a copy of the Tigers at Tier 6, only looking different, of course, or being a copy of the Tech Tree Tiger at Tier 7, or the third option of mixing the Tiger's firepower with the T-34's maneuverability. That's why I've given no stats for this vehicle, but you could handle it multiple ways, but I thought the way Wargaming released the vehicle would be the most interesting. I would see the vehicle released in an event, and you would grind it out with all of its movie star camos, from Bands of Brothers, Saving Private Ryan, and Kelly's Heroes. And with that said, on to the next vehicle. Now, I believe the Brumbar would be pretty easy to add into the game. All they need to do is copy and paste it from World of Tanks console, which they've already done with multiple tanks already in Blitz. And they could add it with the Stern Tiger line, or as its own separate premium vehicle. I mean, there's not much to say about this one, so on to the next tank. The Centurion AVRE. Basically a Centurion 1 with a dozer blade and a T-49's 152mm gun. Now this is a tank I'd love to see in game. Now, the Centurion AVRE was used by the Royal Engineers for a long time, specifically from 1963 to 1991. Now, the firepower of the AVRE would feature a 165mm gun with a little more pen than the 152mm XM gun launcher on the T-49. So basically, get a Centurion 1 in your head at Tier 8 with a dozer blade from the Rampanzer and a gun launcher from the T-49. And if you've been watching the stats on screen, I feel the stats I've given to the vehicle will be pretty balanced. Now, with that said, next please. The Cobra King, one of the most famous Shermans, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, it's the first and Bastogne Sherman with that drawn on the side. You know what I'm talking about. Yeah, you do. Yeah, you do. So back to the game. There's 2 ways Wargaming can release this vehicle. 1. Copy and paste the Sherman Jumbo already in game. 2. Make it the old Sherman Jumbo before it got nerfed, but give it its Tier 4 75mm main gun on the stock Sherman, and thus doing this will make it somewhat skill-based vehicle while it will be OP in the right hands. It will still be lacking because it will have its historically accurate 75mm main gun, and it will be OP against Tier 5s and 6s, but will have a tough time dealing with Tier 7s. Most of the time I play the Jumbo in general, in-game already, it will be up-tiered, and I think that will happen to the Cobra King most often as well. And with that said, next tank, please. Now, the next vehicle is Russian. Now, I chose this vehicle long before the Ukraine crisis, So I know there's these type of people who will say I support Russia in the comments of this video, just because I put the Russian tank on my list. Now, this is just a disclaimer saying I don't support what Russia is doing in Ukraine, hashtag pray for Ukraine. Now on to the tank with the disclaimer out of the way. The T-55AM is a modification of the T-55 made in the 1980s. Now the T-55AM will be like the Super Conqueror in-game, a modification of the Tier 9, making it a Tier 10. Now there's one feature Wargaming could add to the T-55AM, making it more unique. Now the T-55AM could fire ATGMs, like the Sheridan missile in-game. Now, it's a feature that would make the tank unique, but doesn't need it. But the T-55AM is still a T-55 with more horsepower and armor. So I think I covered the T-55AM tank properly, so next. Now the SO-122 is a unique vehicle. It was an attempt made by the Yugoslav military to upgrade their old Shermans, but only upgraded one. Now they scratch-built a Sherman turret with a 122mm A19 field gun onto the new engine, specifically the Russian V2-2R engine, which is also fitted on Russian T-34s. Now with the history of the vehicle out of the way, let's talk about how the vehicle would sit in game. I feel the tank would sit at either Tier 7 or Tier 6. I'm split on what tier it should sit in. But the tank would literally have no gun depression or elevation, but the stats are probably telling you that right now as I speak, so why should I ramble for another 15 minutes and just let the stats tell you? So why don't I just go on to the ending screen. So these are just some of the vehicles I'd like to see added in game. I also have another video ideas for like game modes in Blitz and events or camos. But back to this video, you only got some of the tanks on my list for vehicles I'd like to add to Blitz. So if I get 75 likes, which I think we can do, on this video, I'll make it a two-parter. And tell me down in the comments if you'd like to see some of the ideas I mentioned in this video into their own video. And tell me if you'd like this different style of video. And with that said, may God bless and good day.